Hello everyone. I'm Patricia Carvelis and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we stand, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and their elders past, present and emerging. I'm here with you tonight to discuss an issue that is critical to all of us, not just here in Sydney, but of course across the world. Australia's decarbonised future and our transition to a renewable superpower. That's right, superpower, but in the way you should be a superpower. How can we do this? How fast can we do this? And what are the benefits for the economy and people, and how can we work together? That is the framework of tonight's conversation. And looking at this large Sydney audience here tonight, I see that you're also very keen to hear from our speakers and join in the discussion. It's so wonderful to see so many people out. Welcome to everybody, and please clap for yourselves. Half of making change is just turning up, and the fact that so many people are here to participate in this conversation is just wonderful. Later in the City Talks, we will be joined by the Honourable Chris Bowen MP, Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and leaders from business, finance and community to discuss how we can reach further and act faster together. Now, some of you may have noted coming in that there is a vigil going on this evening and across the country for Cassius Turvey, the tragic story of the 15-year-old Aboriginal boy who was murdered coming home from school. A lot of us have been very moved by this story because I think it reminds us of not only the preciousness of life, but the vulnerability of children, and Aboriginal communities across the country are mourning, and we want to acknowledge and respect the fact that many people have turned out for that. We're having a different conversation tonight, but everyone here, I know, would be very much thinking about that family that's in mourning and the broader ramifications of that story. But I'm just going to leave that there and just acknowledge that that's going on. So let's get started. We have a lot to discuss. Please welcome Uncle Alan Murray from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council for a welcome to country.
Thank you, Patricia. Yama Dun Maroon, how are you? But also I want to acknowledge that we're on the land, the ancestral lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The Gadigal people have been in Australia, or here in Sydney, for 40,000 years, 60,000 years. If you want to be part of our legacy and join with us, we can show you how to survive in this country called Australia. But more importantly, it's about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We certainly want to see a voice to Parliament, truth-telling about this great country, but also, more importantly, we want that representative voice to make sure it reflects the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I thank Patricia for acknowledging the Yamaji Noongar boy who was tragically killed last week. And it's important to reflect that when it comes to which affects our children, it affects our communities and affects, I suppose, states and also Australia. And as you can see next door, there's a vigil there, and people are coming together to ignite and also celebrate and to make sure that this won't happen again. With that, have a great evening, pay respect to yourselves, I respect myself, but also show the leadership, and the leadership in terms of caring for this country called Australia. And I know that a lot of speakers are going to talk about that, and I wish them well. With that, have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uncle Alan. Our first speaker tonight is Sydney's longest-serving Mayor, Clover Moore. Under her leadership, the City of Sydney is recognised globally and locally as being at the forefront of action on climate change. The city's Sustainable Sydney 2030-2050 continuing the vision will build on those achievements. Sydney has the credentials to lead change, and now with all levels of government, business and community aligning, Sydney is primed and ready for more. Please welcome the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you all for being here. And a very warm welcome to Minister Chris Bowen, our speakers and our panellists. And I want to say to Minister Bowen, it was a great relief that we now have a government committed to taking action on climate change. So, well done. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of our land, and pay my respects to the elders both past and present, and also acknowledge the people of the many nations who live in our city. And I want to acknowledge the Justice for Cassius Turvey campaign and the vigil outside the town hall. As we know, vigils are being held across the country to raise awareness about this horrifying murder. On behalf of the City of Sydney, I send sincere condolences to the family and friends of Cassius Turvey for their unimaginable loss. Well, it's really good to see you all here at our second City Talk post-COVID. Australia's time has come. While we have always had vast renewable energy resources, after years of denial and delay by previous governments, we now have a collective will and the compulsion from governments, business and community to make Australia a renewable energy superpower. And tonight we have representatives from the federal and city governments. We were also to have had the State Energy Minister, Matt Keane, who's a late apology as he's attending an international climate summit. We have First Nations business, we have sustainable finance and also a representative on ethical investment. And we all need to work together to achieve wholesale change. This is Australia's greatest opportunity. Not seizing the opportunity could become our greatest cost and loss. When the independent team was first elected to the City of Sydney in 2004 and I became Lord Mayor, we knew climate change was a reality and that it would only worsen as governments and some media continued to ignore the threat. I led the development and implementation of the City of Sydney's groundbreaking strategy, Sustainable Sydney 2030. This was the first long-term strategy for Sydney since the 70s, and not only led Sydney to becoming more environmentally, economically, socially and culturally sustainable, but it's elevated Sydney to global city status. The strategy, which has inspired other cities to develop comparable strategies, including Wuhan, and I just want to tell you about Wuhan. A delegation was led by the Mayor, came to see me, there we can see in 2015, and we briefed them on Sustainable Sydney 2030. And then I visited Wuhan some years later, and I was presented by the Mayor with Sustainable Wuhan 2049. That's when the anniversary of the revolution, of course. And he said, and this is based on Sustainable Sydney 2030. And I was pretty excited about this. If a city that has 11 million people and is heading up a province of 60 million people is doing all the things that we're doing here in Sydney, that's going to make a great contribution to reducing climate change. So when we had our consultation back in 2008, we talked to 180,000 people about that. And people told us they wanted a city that was green, global and connected, and 97% of them said they wanted us to address global warming. And so that's been our highest priority, as many of you know, since 2008. Its successor, Sustainable Sydney 2030 to 2050, continuing the vision, was released this year, and again following extensive consultation, with the new targets that include net zero emissions across the City of Sydney by 2035, which we brought forward from 2040. And that's a really tough one. That's not just going to be in our own operations, but we want to see that right across all our businesses and residential communities. So you're all going to be involved. We were the first major city in Australia to declare a climate emergency, but we all must reach further and faster in transitioning to renewable energy. The city leads by example. In 2007, our operations became carbon neutral, and we were the first government in Australia to receive official carbon neutral certification. However, our most significant reduction to date is that from 2020, 100% of our electricity has come from renewable sources. Our 60 million 10-year agreement to purchase renewable electricity for our streetlights, our swimming centres, our sports fields, our depots, our libraries, and even heritage buildings like this beautiful town hall, is estimated to save our ratepayers up to $500,000 every year for 10 years, and is reducing our emissions by 20,000 tonnes. And at this time, this was the largest standalone renewable deal for any Australian council. And it is terrific that early this year, the Southern Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils brokered an electricity deal in which 19 councils now also use 100% renewable energy for their operations. When we signed our 100% renewable electricity contract, critics said our renewable energy would not flow directly from its source to the city, that the lights would go off when the sun went down. But by using our purchasing power to demand greater supply, we've been greening the grid. And as more of us exert that power, the more supply we demand, the closer we will get to phasing out fossil fuels entirely. The transition towards renewable electricity in Sydney is creating jobs in regional New South Wales and supporting Australia becoming a renewable energy superpower. We've contributed to 200 construction jobs and 150 ongoing renewable energy jobs at the Sapphire Wind Farm in Glen Innes, 250 construction jobs and 150 ongoing jobs in the Bowman Solar Farm near Wagga Wagga, and 50 construction jobs at the community-owned Repower Shoalhaven Solar Farm. Because of this and other actions like converting streetlights to LED, installing more than 7,000 solar panels across 45 city-owned buildings, installing a 500 kilowatt Tesla battery at our new Alexandria depot to use more renewable energy generated on site, transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles, upgrading our assets so they're more efficient, the city has reduced emissions in our own operations by 76%, and our original goal had been to reduce emissions by 70% by 2030. And we have done that 9 years early. And all this while, we have expanded the service. And all this while, we have expanded services we deliver to our fast-growing residential and business populations. So this is just from one city government. Imagine the impact of renewable energy investment from all governments. Earlier this year, Council committed to supporting a community campaign to ban advertising by companies involved in the production or supply of fossil fuels at Council-sponsored events and on Council-managed property. And again, we will work with other councils and council organisations to encourage them to do the same. One of our greatest strengths has been in our partnerships. Our first and one of our most important partnerships is with C40, which is a network of 96 global cities making up more than 20% of the world's economy, who are working together to take urgent action on climate change. Sydney has been an active member of the C40 since 2007, and our LED streetlight upgrade was inspired by the work of the City of Los Angeles. Los Angeles, of course, was the first city in the United States to use LED lights. We were briefed on this at a C40 conference back in 2007, and we introduced it back here. And it has been saving us $800,000 every year in electricity and maintenance costs since 2015. So you've just seen an image of when we started out in 2007. The chairman there was Ken Livingstone, a very inspiring London mayor, and here we have the Paris group headed by Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris. So our Better Buildings Partnership was established in 2011, and this involves owners of major commercial buildings in the city, which represent 59% of commercial floor space in central Sydney. The partnership has reduced emissions they've signed up to our commitments, 70% reduction by 2030. They've already reduced their emissions by 63%. They're on track to reach 83% by 2030. They've also reduced their water use by 26%, and they have saved more than $30 million a year. In 2005, City Switch was established in Sydney and supports office tenants to improve their environmental performance, and it has gone Australia-wide. In the City of Sydney, City Switch tenants occupy 30% of all office space, so they're making a tremendous contribution as well, and that's an end-of-year report where you can see they're all pretty excited. Under the Sustainable Destination Partnerships, we partner with most of Sydney's well-known cultural and entertainment venues, and more than 60% of hotel rooms to improve their environmental performance and investments in renewable energy. When you think about the emissions in all that lighting in theatres, when you think about all the emissions in hotels being operating 24 hours a day, they have been contributing a huge amount to the city's emissions. And here you can see that the Opera House also excited about setting off on their journey. And they have now reduced their emissions by 28% and water use by 33%. And they only started their program in 2018, so they're doing really well. And also we partner with 27,000 residents, and that's a number we hope only will go up, who live in 230 large apartment buildings under the Smart Green Apartments program, in which Owners Corporation have reduced emissions, water and running costs by 30%. We want all residents living in apartments across the city to be part of this program. We also work with other metropolitan councils under the Resilience Sydney program to build a long-term resilience across metropolitan Sydney. And here we are all gathered together just last week. And each year we have been buying more carbon credits from Indigenous-led products. Our goal is to purchase 100% Australian regenerative offsets by 2025. I acknowledge the work of the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, who are working to establish carbon farming on Aboriginal land in New South Wales. And our Green Power campaign is about helping residents and businesses switch to 100% renewable electricity, thanks to the households and the businesses who've done so already. If you haven't, well, it's really time you did it. Collaborations can really make things happen. Earlier this year, in another Australian first, the city adopted net zero building standards. This means that developers of new office buildings, hotels, shopping centres and major redevelopments need to reduce emissions through energy efficiency, on-site renewable energy production and off-site renewable energy procurement to improve their efficiency from 2023. They're giving them a short warning. And to achieve net zero by 2026. The new standards will be mandated in our local planning controls, so everyone will have to be part of it, all the developers in the city. For over 4 years, we've collaborated with the state government agencies, with metropolitan councils, with developers, with property owners and industry bodies, sharing technical data and analysis and practical information about implementation. This information is now freely available on the city's website. It has already helped the New South Wales Government in its own sustainable buildings policy, and the City of Melbourne is closely observing our lead. Net zero building standards will reduce emissions. They will improve the resilience of buildings and the comfort of occupants. Analysis has demonstrated that between 2023 and 2050, they will save investors, businesses and occupants more than $1.3 billion from energy bills. This is so significant that I recently presented this policy to the C40 for their conference this year. So to conclude, all of this work, and I've given you some detail, but I want to stress that all of this work is really important because while cities occupy 2% of the world's land mass, they leave an enormous footprint. Cities alone consume over 2/3 of the world's energy and account for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions. But cities can make up for that in their policies, their plans, and the practices of their governments and their businesses. Here in Sydney, we have even more to offer. Sydney, the heart of Australia's financial and professional services sector, is perfectly placed to spearhead Australia's carbon and related trading systems. Sydney's strengths will play an important role in raising capital and redirecting financial systems. As a City Council, we have done and continue to do everything we can to address global warming. We now call on state and federal governments. At a minimum, we need a green grid, Minister Bowen, so we can reach further and act even faster to save the planet and to help save the people who are suffering right now from the impacts of climate change, such as the women and children of Somalia who are facing climate-induced famine. So if you wish to help this unfolding humanitarian crisis, please go to UNICEF or the Australian Red Cross websites and donate. There we are, you're all used to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I do worry that as the world focuses on so many crises, that issue is not getting the attention it deserves. So thank you, Lord Mayor, for bringing the attention onto that issue.
We are the greatest country on earth, but we can have an even better future if we seize the opportunities that are right there in front of us. The opportunity to shape change rather than be shaped by it. And we can shape change more effectively if we seek to unite people on that journey of change. Together, we can end the climate wars. Together, we can take advantage of the opportunity for Australia to be a renewable energy superpower.
Since that day in May, the Albanese government has passed the first real climate change bill in a decade through our parliament, legislating our emissions reduction targets and taking meaningful action on climate change. They've hit the ground running, but it's only the beginning. With us tonight is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the Honourable Chris Bowen MP, to tell us more about what the government will continue to do for all Australians in combating climate change while boosting jobs in renewable energy and putting downward pressure on energy prices and ensuring supply. Please welcome the Minister, Chris Bowen.
Thank you, Patricia. With this building, Sydney's secular cathedral is important to all of us who live in Sydney. It's also important to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose elders we celebrate tonight and pay our respects, and on whose land this building sits. This room was the venue for the first ever Koori Ball in 1968, with Prime Minister Gorton in attendance. But much more importantly than that, this building, both on the steps and inside, has hosted many protests calling for rights which should have been a given. Protests which have seen progress, too slow, but progress nonetheless. And of course, whether you're outside tonight or inside, we all stand in solidarity and grief and say no more. Clover, thanks for the invitation to be here tonight, and congratulations for the City Talks program. A vibrant, sophisticated city like Sydney needs a proper debate, and City Talks have become an important part of our cultural life. And there is nothing more important to talk about than our drive towards being a renewable energy superpower. I could talk about this all night. I don't intend to. I intend to limit my remarks, Patricia, to 3 or 4 hours. And I could talk about our drive to take our energy system to 82% renewable by 2030 and then beyond to become a renewable energy export superpower, to take it to more than 82%, to take it over 100%, to export through submarine cables, which we'll hear about more tonight, through green hydrogen, which we can talk about. All this is very worthy of tonight's topic, and I look forward to a strong discussion with the panel. I could talk about the budget tonight, about the $20 billion for the Rewiring the Nation Fund, which is the green grid, which we've allocated the first money for the Marinus Link, to link Tasmania to the mainland in a more efficient way and to assist Tasmania move from 100% renewables, which it is right now, to 200% renewables and become its own renewable energy export superpower to the mainland. Could talk about the $2 billion powering the region fund and much more. I'm going to work on the basis that you've all read the budget papers, though. Patricia has. She's questioned me about them, so I won't talk about that at great length tonight. Instead, what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is where we sit in relation to the world energy crisis, what it means for our drive towards renewable energy, what it means for our debate about climate change and energy, because this is very topical. I look forward to taking your questions with our very eminent panel a little bit later. But the fact of the matter is that the world is in the midst, right now, of the biggest energy shock since the 1970s. Every government around the world is grappling with it. The budget was honest about what this means, a 20% increase, which has already occurred, and a 30% increase next year absent government intervention. As we've made clear, we don't intend to let that happen. There will be government intervention. But I want to focus tonight on a deeper issue about what this means for renewable energy, both in terms of the debate and the substance and our drive towards renewable energy. Because some would see, and indeed some would relish, the chance for this crisis to delay our drive to being a renewable energy superpower. I'll be frank, these are the same people who've been responsible for excuse after excuse, alibi to alibi, for the last 10 years to delay our drive to renewable energy. Now, this is not intended, and it won't be a partisan talk tonight, but I will be very frank with you, and I will be using plain language because these are important topics. So let me be clear. This energy crisis has not been caused by renewable energy here, in Europe, or anywhere else. This crisis has been caused by a few factors: the immoral invasion of Ukraine, over-reliance in Europe on one particular form of energy, gas from Russia, and in Australia, 10 years of policy indolence, which has seen our transition to renewable energy happen too slowly and in too disorderly a fashion. We had 4 gigawatts of power leave our grid over the last decade and only 1 gigawatt come in. You don't need to be an energy economist to know that's going to put huge pressure on supply and prices and reliability, and that's exactly what we've been living for. So I just have a couple of key messages tonight. We cannot, and the government will not, let the current crisis interrupt our drive to cleaner, cheaper, renewable energy. The transition is in fact even more important, not only for reasons of climate, as compelling as those reasons are, and we would all agree on them, we've seen some of them on the screen just now, but also because renewable energy happens to be the cheapest form of energy, which is rather handy when you're facing an affordability crisis. And also because with the right policy settings and with proper storage and firming, which perhaps we'll talk about in a moment, it's also a very reliable source of energy. Again, some people deny this, but the fact is there is no geopolitical crisis which can interrupt the flow of sun to our landmass or the blowing of the wind on and off our shore. None. Now, I raise this strongly because we do need to be vigilant in this debate. We just heard the boss say we're ending the climate wars, and we're seeking to do that. And it's true that the May election was a big step forward, election of a government with a strong climate agenda, which for some of the last 10 years seemed unthinkable, and a progressive majority in both houses of parliament. That's a huge step forward, which I freely acknowledge and celebrate. But we shouldn't pretend there are no voices seeking to take us backwards, because they are, and they're very vocal. And they must be counted if we're to ensure that we cement the progress we've made so far. There's almost a daily, sometimes multiple times a day, drip feed of editorials and opinion pieces in our newspapers, replete with misinformation and with downright lies from the usual suspects, I must say. Now, one example, I'm not going to name the author, but she's prominent. A prominent right-wing commentator took to her regular spot in a prominent Sydney newspaper this week and wrote this: "There's only one reason why power prices are skyrocketing. It's because we are replacing reliable 24/7 power provided by fossil fuels with unreliable wind and solar, power that needs expensive backup power for 70% of the time when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining." Now, as if renewable energy hadn't repeatedly been established as the cheapest form of energy available. And the author of that claimed that it needs to be backed up with other energy. Presumably she means fossil fuels, which is a concession that they are expensive. The crystal clear fact is, even taking into account the need for storage, and we do need storage for renewable energy, the deniers and delayers say, oh, you know, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Well, congratulations for noticing that the sun goes down at the end of the day. That's quite a revelation. I concede that. But it's also the case that the rain doesn't always fall, but we store water for when we need it, and we can store renewable energy as well. But with that storage and with that transmission, even taking into account the cost of that, the costs of upgrading our energy grid to make it green, even taking those things into account, renewable energy is far and away the cheapest form of energy available to us today. And again, you don't need to take my word for it. Take the word of Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, not a radical organisation, a conservative organisation historically, who said, I'm going to quote him, "There is a mistaken idea that it is somehow a clean energy crisis. That is simply not true. The world is struggling with too little clean energy, not too much. Faster clean energy transitions would have helped moderate the impact of this crisis, and they represent the best way out of it. When people misleadingly blame climate and energy for today's crisis, what they are doing, whether they mean it or not, is shifting attention away from the real cause, Russia's invasion of Ukraine." So far from undermining the need for the transition to renewables, this crisis actually underlines the need for that transition to happen more quickly and in a more orderly fashion. Now, as well as a rearguard attempt to undermine and deny the transition to renewables, the current energy crisis is being used by some to propose nuclear energy for Australia. Now, this is just the latest attempt to delay renewable energy. This represents the third quiver in the armoury. We have denial, we have delay, and we also have distraction. And nuclear energy is a distraction. Nuclear energy is by far the most expensive form of energy available. And it would be more expensive in Australia, again, because we don't have a nuclear industry to start with. So we'd be starting from scratch, which is a more expensive proposition than building a new nuclear power plant in a country that does. The alleged small modular reactors you would have heard about being built around the world are a myth. It's not a technology that's fully developed. No plants are proven to be commercially viable anywhere in the world, not one. SMR stands for Small Modular Reactor. It also stands for Someday Maybe Reality. In the United States, only one SMR has received design approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that SMR has been found to be too late and too expensive by the Institute of Energy Economics in the United States. So nuclear energy is far from our answer. What we need is this transition to 82% renewables by 2030, which is 86 months away. Now, some of you would say, could we do better? I'd love to. Actually, we're now in November, 85 months from 2030. That's not long. Our daughter finished the HSC yesterday. My wife and I dropped her off at kindergarten last week. She has no business going to university next year. But alas, that 12 years has gone really quickly. The next 8 years are going to go much more quickly in this drive towards renewable energy. So we have wasted a decade. We now have not a second to waste. This is my point about the ambition for 2030. It is not far away, and hence we have needed to get cracking. I've seen this denial and delay to try and slow us down. There are Liberal senators who've spoken in the Parliament against our climate bill who denied the science of climate change in 2021 and 2022. Maybe you could allow that in 1990 or 2000, but in 2022 there are still Liberal senators denying climate change. I raise these examples for no other reason but to remind you that our climate debate, while it's taken massive steps forward, there remain those in the media and in Parliament who relish this opportunity of the world's energy crisis to see us go backwards. Of course, in 2007, the Labor government was elected with a strong climate agenda, and the Liberal Party was elected that election with an emissions trading scheme as their policy as well. It was thought that we'd reached a national consensus on climate change. It turned out not to be. 15 years later, we take the approach of arguing that not only is action on climate change an international obligation, which it is, an obligation to our future generations, which it is, but also it's in our national interest, our economic interest, because we can create hundreds of thousands of jobs across our country, 5 out of 6 of them in the regions that have powered Australia for so long, will be the regions that power us into the future. They have the room for renewable energy, they have the skills and the energy workforce, they have access to the grid where it's strongest. These are the areas that will power us in the future, except the energy will be clean and green and will create jobs as we go. So take your pick. Whether you prefer renewable energy superpower or powerhouse or Saudi Arabia of renewable energy, all are applicable. They all work for Australia. More sunlight hits our landmass than any country in the world. Any country in the world. Our worst solar resource, northwest Tasmania, is better than Germany's best solar resource. And yet they're also on the journey to solar technology and doing very well at it. But we have much more advantage as we do so. So I'm pleased with the progress of the new government. I am. I'm pleased. I'm proud of it. We've passed the first Climate Act through the Parliament. We've invested in the Marinus Link as part of our $20 billion fund. We've enmeshed emissions reduction into the national energy objectives, which is important and significant and should have happened years ago. It's happened now. We've done all these things. I'm pleased, but I'm far from satisfied. Far from satisfied, because we have so much more to do. We have unparalleled potential as a renewable energy powerhouse. We're also the developed country with the most to lose from climate change. Developing countries have much to lose. Every country has much to lose. We are the developed country with the most to lose from climate change because of our place in the world. Now, I open tonight by talking about the importance of this room. It's in this room that my party and our country said goodbye to Gough Whitlam and to Neville Wran. Both people important to me and I'm sure important to you. They steered us in a new direction, tackling the issues and the challenges of their day, overcoming the naysayers, overcoming the deniers of their time. I'd like to think they'd be looking down on us and wishing us well as we, a new government and a new generation, embarks on this new challenge, this new journey to build Australia's renewable energy superpower, to overcome the deniers and the delayers and the distractors. The national task of storing Australia's climate leadership, restoring it so that we can create the jobs and investments that will create so many jobs for Australians who deserve nothing less. This is the task that falls to us, the new generation and the new government. It's a task we take with relish and enthusiasm. And I also look forward to your questions and the panel discussion with relish and enthusiasm tonight. Thank you for coming along this evening.
Thank you, Minister Bowen. David Griffin is the founder and the CEO of Sun Cable, one of the world's most ambitious solar export projects. It's incredible. The scale of the project is absolutely enormous. And David also convinced Australia's two richest men, Mike Cannon-Brookes and Andrew Forrest, to invest millions into this renewable energy project. Let's take a look.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia, for the introduction, and Lord Mayor Clovermore for hosting us tonight. It's a great topic, and thank you all for attending. As the video explained, Australia receives a truly ridiculous amount of solar energy. And it's only one of our renewable energy resources. The video stated 58 million petajoules of energy, which probably doesn't mean, it's hard to conceptualise that. But it's worth repeating what was in there, that of that 58 million petajoules, Australia has a globally very large solar industry. And that globally very large solar industry converted 400 petajoules out of that 58 million petajoules into electricity in 2020. There's an absolute rounding error. If we magically transform the entire Australian economy to run on solar-derived electricity overnight, and I'm not just talking about our electricity demand, but all of our energy demand, that's 25,000 petajoules, and we get 58 million petajoules every year. It is an unbelievably large resource. And what goes with that is land. Anyone who's been privileged enough to drive across Australia gets that sense that it just goes on forever and ever. It is an extraordinary resource. But meanwhile, there are billions of people to our north, and they do not have those abundant renewable energy resources. And they do not have those vast tracts of land available. And it's bugged me for a long time, many years. I've been building I've been building wind farms since 2000 and solar farms since 2010. And it's bugged me for so long that there was no way to capture that enormous energy resource and transmit it on an intercontinental basis to where those huge loads exist and where they're growing really fast. But at the start of 2018, I went back and had a look at where the one particular technology that we needed to make intercontinental transmission work, went back to see where that was up to. And that's high voltage direct current submarine cable technology. It's a very dry topic, but it's incredibly important in enabling Australia, an island continent with a small population, to transmit huge amounts of electricity to our neighbours. It's been around since the 1950s. Sweden connected an island off the coast, and it has been evolving ever since. It's not a revolutionary technology. It's not like solar. There's no massive change every year, but it is relentless improvement over many decades. At the start of 2018, I determined, well, actually, this technology's now evolved that we can build the first intercontinental electricity transmission network. So with that, I decided to found Sun Cable, and the Australia-Asia Power Link became our marquee project. So the first market we chose to serve is Singapore. Singapore gets 97% of its electricity from gas. A bit over half comes from piped gas from its neighbours, Malaysia and Indonesia, and the rest is liquefied natural gas from elsewhere around the world. The pipe gas will dwindle through this decade as it's repurposed for domestic consumption in those two countries. And if Singapore chose to do nothing, they could continue to go with just a complete reliance on LNG. But anyone who watches the energy markets, anyone who watches the news knows what that means. It's essentially you're at the whim of tyrants' decisions around the world. And Singapore likes to plan, they like to plan well ahead, and they like to have a set of circumstances where they are not overly reliant on any, and they have a diverse supply of critical resources. So it's important to them that they diversify their energy supplies, and interconnections from neighbouring countries and as far afield as Australia are a critical part of that solution. So, and companies within Singapore have a huge demand for zero emissions electricity, which is currently difficult to source. So, huge demand and a welcoming government. At the other end, we've got 12,000 hectares of land 800 kilometres south of Darwin. One of the best solar resources on the planet. And in between the two, we have Darwin. Darwin is a microcosm of Singapore in that it's also entirely gas-driven for its electricity supply. And as a result, the electricity cost is very high. There's a huge amount of industry and other loads that want to go to Darwin, but they need two things. They need stably priced, low-cost electricity, and it has to be zero emissions. So we're working to deliver that market demand as well. So to achieve all that, we're developing the world's largest solar farm, 18 gigawatts, over 12,000 hectares, 41 gigawatt hours of storage, also the largest battery, and with that combined, we are dispatching electricity 24 hours a day from the solar farm, 3 gigawatts, 800 kilometres up the rail corridor to Darwin. Will supply a massive increase of supply to Darwin, in fact multiples of what it currently is, and the rest is dispatched off to Singapore. It is a first of a kind, but it is designed to be a first of many, and we're already working on our subsequent projects. But to really drive the success, I think towards the end of that video, we made the statement that the technology already exists, and it does. But, and I'll just finish with this one story, and you can extrapolate it to other technologies. If you imagined yourself as a solar module manufacturer, in all your time of selling solar modules, you've never sold solar modules to an optimally sized customer. Every customer, from your perspective, is small. So you end up designing a solar module that's optimised for northern Germany, it's generalised. So you can sell that product in northern Germany, northern Tasmania, or central Australia. And from my perspective, that's terrible. I'm throwing away huge amounts of efficiency gains, etc., by buying that generic product. So we're collecting an enormous amount of data and working with manufacturers to change the specifications and using the size of our order book to get those specifications put into the new technology. And final point, to really make all of this successful so that we can use this as a first of kind and a first of many, we need to domesticate so much of this manufacturing, the products that are required for this. So we're working with manufacturers to show them the demand that is coming and show them the specifications that are required in their equipment so that they deliver a better product and it's manufactured here. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is a remarkable female business leader, renowned both in Australia and globally. Shamara Wickraman Ayaka is a Chief Executive Officer at Macquarie Group. During her tenure, Macquarie Group has cemented its reputation as a global leader in funding, and they essentially are funding the mammoth energy transition through their infrastructure and banking divisions. She is the work stream lead for the United Nations Climate Finance Leadership Initiative and Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. She's here tonight to tell us more about sustainable finance globally and also just the role of sustainable finance in Australia's transition to renewable energy and our future as a renewable energy superpower. Let's just watch this.
At Macquarie, we are working with partners around the world to support decarbonisation efforts and invest in the energy transition. Here's how we've been doing that over the past year. We're investing in renewable energy solutions at scale and new climate technologies. Through our Green Investment Group, we are developing 30 gigawatts of new green energy projects. And we launched Corio Generation, a specialist offshore wind business with one of the largest development portfolios in the world. In Australia, we're supporting one of the largest privately funded and owned utility-scale batteries. And in Europe, we launched Fleet, a new electric vehicle charging infrastructure business. To help decarbonize industries such as aviation, steel, chemicals and refineries, we launched HYCC, a specialized green hydrogen company in Europe with our partner Nobian. In the US, we are developing and investing in renewable fuels projects that convert agricultural waste into low-carbon energy, with construction of the first facility underway. Our asset management team is working with portfolio companies to transition the world's largest infrastructure portfolio to net zero by 2040. Like accelerating the rollout of fast-charging infrastructure across the UK motorway network through our acquisition of RoadChef. We provide integrated carbon offsetting solutions for clients and bring capital and expertise to carbon offset generating projects. And we're making progress towards our own net zero commitment.
Please welcome to the stage Shamara Wickramanayaka.
Thanks everyone from me as well for joining. Hopefully you can hear me. I was told David Griffin wasn't using the lectern because he's too tall, and sadly I'm vertically challenged in the other direction, so I'm also going to speak to you without the lectern. And I also want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering tonight, who are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge the multiple vigils going on for the tragic loss of the life of 15-year-old Cassius Turvey, who was tragically murdered. So with that, I guess I would like to thank Clover Moore for holding these incredible City Talks and including me in the discussion with such esteemed other speakers this evening on this important topic. This climate response is one of the most critical and complex issues of our generation, and it is going to take many decades to sort out. It's going to require unprecedented innovation in terms of solutions, and it's also going to require a meaningful collaboration between the public and private sector as we respond to this. And each country is going to have to design its own glide path in doing this with its legislative frameworks and policy frameworks. And as Minister Bowen said, for Australia, with two of our exports being fossil fuel, LNG and coal, we stand as a developed country to be the most negatively impacted by this transition that is inevitably going to have to happen. But in responding, as the Minister and David Griffin also acknowledged, we are blessed with our positioning in terms of responding with renewable energy, abundant sunshine, wind, ability to be, as we say, the renewable superpower and an exporter. And in addition to that, we are going to need a whole lot of critical minerals to respond in terms of batteries, etc., lithium, cobalt, and Australia is blessed with all of these as well. So we need to think about our glide path in how we capitalise on all of this to play in the supply chains that are going to have to develop globally to respond there. And that's why it's fantastic to see the federal government responding with this commitment to 43% reduction in our own emissions by 2030 to set the pathway, and also, as the Minister mentioned, the 20 billion commitment to greening the grid we've had so far, and the extra 5 billion commitment for other climate transitions to set the path for catalysing private investment. And here in New South Wales as well, supporting that, there's a commitment to a 50% reduction by 2050, and there's also the electricity infrastructure roadmap that is looking to catalyse 32 billion of private investment, and one of the most comprehensive state packages for energy that we've got. Now, in working with all these solutions, we have a mountain to climb to deliver the climate response that we need. We don't have any technologically ready and economically compelling enough solutions to get us to where we want. And we've talked about things like solar and wind, which are now 20% of world energy source, being the lowest cost sources of energy, but the challenge is that they are intermittent and we need firming solutions. And you saw on that video, we're investing in utility scale batteries here in Australia at Hazelwood in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, but that gives you firming that's several hours. We need seasonal firming, and so we need things like hydrogen to come to scale in terms of being technologically ready and economically viable if we're going to have baseload renewable energy. We also need further investment in things like solar and wind. We also need abatement solutions if we're going to get there. We need to take carbon and greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere with things like carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, etc. So there's a massive amount of work to do, but this challenge also creates opportunity for all of us to respond on the public and private sector side. So here in Australia at Macquarie, there's 2 areas next that we're responding in, having been involved in solar projects, waste-to-energy projects, etc., onshore wind projects. Those areas at the moment are offshore wind and electrification of transport through electric vehicles. Offshore wind, we have the capacity to generate multiples of our grid usage currently through offshore wind. And so we're involved in 2 Victorian offshore wind projects that are starting up here, which is the Great Eastern Offshore Wind and the Great Southern Offshore Wind. So one is off the coast of Gippsland and it's a 2.5 gigawatt project. One's off Bass Strait and it's a 1.5 gigawatt project. And we're going to be looking for other projects like this in other states like New South Wales, etc., as we try to bring offshore wind to be a big part of our grid where we have capacity to deliver this. We also, in relation to electric vehicles, acknowledge that there are 50 million tonnes of emissions, and that's 10% of our emissions in this country and set to grow as transport keeps growing. And so we are the first Australian banking group to be setting up a specialised buying service to support people in acquiring these electric vehicles. At the moment, our car leasing business has more than 50% of new leases, 55% being for electric vehicles. And, you know, electric vehicles at the moment are 3% of vehicles in Australia. That's 1/6 of where we are in Europe. But as these vehicles become more affordable, we want to do our part to help drive the penetration of EVs here. We also need to work with the public sector in terms of policy frameworks to support this in terms of supply chain and new models of electric vehicles. And importantly for Australia, in such a large country, working on the charging infrastructure, which again, a challenge but an opportunity to invest. Now, obviously just getting offshore wind sorted and electric vehicles sorted and important things like sun cable that we're talking about are not going to get us there. We need investment across multiple sectors. So as well as what's going on in transport that we've talked about, and that's just in passenger vehicles, long-haul transport, we need, for rail, potentially hydrogen, we need sustainable aviation fuel for air travel. We need solutions in agriculture, and we're working on things. We have 4.6 million hectares of farmland that we manage here. We're working on precision technologies to reduce use of chemicals and emissions on that. We're working with CSIRO on new low emissions feedstock to reduce methane emissions from livestock. We're working on soil carbon capture in agriculture. And then other areas like buildings, waste, industry, solutions needed across the board, which, as I say, challenge but opportunity. And a big area we're putting a lot of investment into and effort, as I said, is energy, baseload energy and the firming solution. And hydrogen, we think, has big potential there. So we're working on 3 hydrogen projects at the moment in Australia, one over in Kwinana with BP at its refinery, one in the Pilbara for the mining areas, and the other with the Port of Newcastle to help that community transition from coal-based, ideally, to a hydrogen solutions. Now, as we do this, what we're trying to do is find demand centres where hydrogen is quickly competitive. And we're also working with regional economies as we do this, because hydrogen has the potential not only to solve Australia's energy problems in terms of baseload renewable energy, but it also has the potential to be a new export industry for this country. But in doing that, what it can do is create new industry and new jobs. And we're working with universities and vocational training organisations. You know, we heard the Sun Cable job creation, early stage development of these wind farms that we're doing offshore Victoria. There'll be 1,200 jobs per wind farm. So we're trying to build the skills as well for the nation as we transition to these new industries. And I guess that's the point I'd like to finish on, is this transition. You know, not just do we have to address the climate change issue, and there is a mountain still to climb, but in doing that, we have to think about the social and economic implications as well as we drive the transition. And, you know, the Minister talked about in Europe, the challenge there wasn't energy self-sufficiency or lack of dependency on one supplier. That's causing availability issues, it's causing price of energy and cost of living issues, and we need to be sensitive to how we thread the needle through all of this. The Minister said we've taken out 4 gigawatts, put back on 1. So we need to think about that glide path for Australia, and I know the government has also acknowledged gas being with us for a period as the cleanest form of transition fuel. But the other thing about these high energy prices is, I agree, it's not stopping the need for the journey to the clean transition. It's actually, we think, going to support it, because it's lifted the price point at which renewable energy can be competitive. So we as the private sector think it's going to increase the opportunity to bring capital to these businesses like hydrogen, because you're competing at a higher price point while we go through this challenging period. So we're very much looking forward to working with partners in the public and the private sector on many of these projects you've heard about to help address, as I say, basically what we see as the most critical and the most complex challenge of our generation. But with that challenge, we think does come great opportunity we want to pursue together. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamara. Rowan Foley is from the Wandana clan of the Butchulla people, traditional owners of the Gari, known as Fraser Island to many people, and lives in Alice Springs. Rowan is the Chief Executive Officer at Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. It's a not-for-profit that was founded in 2010 to create changing community prosperity through carbon farming. The Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and the City of Sydney are working together through the ethical trading of carbon credits. Let's learn some more about cultural fire credits and see a cultural burn in action.
Cultural fire credits is a unique and innovative opportunity that will have cultural, environmental, economic and social benefits for all Australians. Cultural fire credits is Aboriginal-led, directed and managed every step of the way, supporting Aboriginal communities across the country to revitalise and maintain culture. The credits are managed in partnership by the Fire Sticks Alliance, a not-for-profit leader in Indigenous cultural fire practices, monitoring and evaluation, and the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, who are leaders in verification, Indigenous knowledge-based solutions and credit trading systems. Cultural fire credits can be purchased by the Catalyst Market trading platform, and each credit is worth $55. That money goes into a cultural fire credit bank where funds are managed and allocated by the Joint Management Committee. Cultural fire credits will support projects and provide pathways for Aboriginal communities to utilise traditional land management practices to heal, protect and manage the country. Find out more by visiting catalystmarkets.com.au.
We're developing a cultural fire credit being developed between the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and the Fire Sticks Alliance Corporation. The aim of the fire credit is to allow for people to be able to get out on country and practice cultural burning on country.
People can invest in cultural burning to save the country and ensure that traditional owners continue to practice looking after country.
We're aiming to raise the first $10 million for an exciting community-led program, the Cultural Fire Credit. This is a call for action for you to invest in a community grassroots level organisation that will make change throughout Australia. And I wanted to remind you of the importance that women play in caring for country.
It's so exciting that we have an Indigenous owned and developed credit for the communities to look after country. And a credit that goes through all boundaries of the carbon, of all the animals, the vegetation come back, and also the social benefits within our communities with employment and the transfer of knowledge. This is the credit to invest in, a credit that is developed by community.
Looking after our country, yeah, yeah, with fire.
Thanks. My name's Rowan. I come from the Wundunna clan of the Butchulla people, traditional owners of Gurri, Fraser Island. Has anyone ever been to Fraser Island, Gurri? Yeah? Pretty beautiful place, isn't it? It was native title was secured in 2014 after an 18-year journey. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land we're meeting here today. I'd also like to acknowledge a young fella. I'm going to call him Kuminjay. That's the name we use in Central Australia when I can't mention somebody's name who's passed away. That young man that was tragically murdered. You know, I have sons. You know, you just can't imagine the grief that people are going through. You know, I also think it speaks a little bit to the violence in our nation that we also have to address. I'm not here to talk about that, but I think it touches on it. I would like to share with you a dream. I'd like to invite you to share a dream with me. The dream is about turning the wildfires that we've experienced back into the proper way of looking after country. We've been through these bushfires of late, and it's an artificial state that they're in. See, in Australia, we can have a country where fire is welcomed, fire is encouraged. Fire is a positive force for our community coming together, working together, not in a defensive mode, not fleeing from it, not being burned by it, but be regenerated by it. Fire can be an effective tool for the management of country and for the protection of biodiversity. Fire can be a reason why communities come together in the true spirit of reconciliation, in the knowledge that by working together, we're actually going to make this a better place. And this is a dream that can happen over the next 10 years. You see, with the advent of solar power, that dream's coming to reality. We're yet to address the bushfires in Australia. We can have a dream about putting solar power on the roof, but that dream of developing a country where fire is welcome is something which is very realistic. Sometimes when you dream about things, they can be unrealistic. We can't stop the floodwaters. You can't stand up there like Noah and stop the floodwaters. You can't break a drought when it's not raining, you walk out in the middle of a paddock and it's all dry, and people are going to say, look at that silly bastard, he's trying to make it rain. You can't do it. But we can do something about fire in this country. In 10 years, we can have fire under control by working together. It's the way it's been for the last 65,000 years, and it's the way that we can manage this country moving into the future. Now, the cultural fire credit that we've developed with fire sticks, it comes largely from carbon farming that we practice across northern Australia that generates a carbon credit. And you can invest in those carbon credits, you can buy the carbon credits, you can go carbon neutral. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Sydney City Council in buying Indigenous generated Australian carbon credit units with environmental, social and cultural values. They're putting their money where their mouth is. Carbon farming is part of the solution, along with renewable energy, to Australia being carbon neutral. And imagine just how wonderful it would be if we woke up to Australia where you could turn the power on, you've got renewable energy coming through, you've got solar power on the roof, and you've got an environment that is welcome to fire, a beautiful country that is being managed, our biodiversity is healthy, our waterways are healthy, our communities are working together in a spirit of reconciliation. And these dreams can happen. And that's the work that we're involved in. And that's the dream I'd like to share with you. And I'd like you to walk with us as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rowan. So now the time has come for you to tweet your questions, and I see some of you already have been. Thank you. Tweet your questions to the panel using the hashtag SydCityTalks. And please welcome to the stage all of our speakers, David, Shamara, Minister Bowen, and of course Rowan, who's already in place, and I will sit in between them. So I'm going to open up, if I can, with a question that I want to address to all of you before I get to some of the specifics. And I'm going to start with you, Shamara. What is the key element needed to accelerate? We talk about wanting to be a superpower for renewables, but what do we need right now? What's the key ingredient to accelerate that pathway?
Yeah, well, I think we've had some progress, but I think the big next step is to prioritise the areas that we, Australia, want to focus on and have the public and private sector work on driving the solutions there. And, as I say, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's carbon capture solutions, carbon credit solutions, it's agricultural ones, between us agreeing the pathway and, progressing on that. So it's the breakdown of the detail of how we execute the plan. As I said, I think the emission targets are fantastic. Reading the grid investments that have been encouraged are fantastic, but it's more of that, I think.
David?
I would say that supply chains always come to the top of my concern. I'm very glad that we weren't building the world's largest solar farm through COVID and all the other myriad plagues that all seem to come at once over the last 3 years. Everything from the Evergreen ship blocking the Suez Canal and all the global flow through of supply chain blockages that caused. All of that really highlighted to us just how vulnerable those supply chains are to disruption. And when you're building something that physically contains so much material, you've got to be very concerned about that. Meanwhile, the war, the invasion of Ukraine has triggered an enormous response in Europe to try to develop more domestic renewable energy resources and to be able to transmit that and build out even more transmission internally. And that's placing even more demand on all the components that we need to develop our own renewable energy resource. So So we need more manufacturing of the components. That's, if there was one thing, I'd say it's that.
Well, Minister, what a perfect place to, well, I'm going to ask you the question because I promised I would, and what you think we need now to accelerate that, but then I'd love you to pick up on that point about manufacturing.
Sure, I might come back to that because it's a very important point. And everything Shamara and David said is accurate in my view, but ultimately what we need is willpower. It's national will, political will. We have the technology. I mean, the modern solar panel is an Australian invention. We have the technology, we have the capital, there's plenty of offshore and onshore investment and interest in investment. Just take offshore wind, which is really important. We haven't really talked about it much tonight. One wind farm that's being proposed for Victoria would provide 20% of Victoria's energy needs. One offshore wind farm. We've made it legal, designated the zones, we're getting on with it. But not a day goes by where a new company hasn't said whether they're going to invest in offshore wind in Australia. The money is there. But what we've lacked is the framework. We've lacked the national policy. We've lacked the certainty. Investors crave certainty. That's what investors need more than anything else. Just tell us the rules and tell us you're going to stick to the rules. That's why passing our law was so important. It wasn't so much what it obliged government to do, although it does oblige us to do things. It says to the world's investors, we're open for business. One set of rules, come and invest here. That's what we've needed. The framework. The states are all getting on with different things, which is great. We might talk more about that. But there's been no national framework. That's been happening in the lack of a national framework. Now, to David's point, I do agree that, however, he said supply chain. I mean, I think there's, when people ask me what could get in the way, supply chain, which means, you know, that just the supply of goods to Australia to get this done, labour shortages and social licence, which is community support for some of the big projects which have some controversy like transmission lines and what have you. But on supply chain, it is a challenge, and we have prioritised dealing with that because at the moment, 85% of all the things we need, whether they be solar panels, inverters, conductors, electrolysers, come from China. That's going to grow to 97% in the next 3 years. That's a big risk, putting aside what you think about geopolitical matters. Having one country, any one country dominate is bad news. But we should be making these things here. We've put 60 million solar panels in our roofs in the last 10 years. 1% of them have come from Australia. There's one factory that makes solar panels in Australia, in Adelaide, Tindo. It's inconceivable we would let that happen, that continue. We have the technology, as I said, it's an Australian invention. We have to get on with the task, and we have a range of policies working with the private sector to do it. We're making more things here because we're a huge market, actually, for renewable energy, despite the fact our population isn't huge by international standards. We're actually a huge market for a range of reasons. So we do need to be making more of the things here for all the reasons that David articulated and more.
Rowan, on that question of accelerating the pathway to carbon neutrality and renewables superpower, how do you see it?
Oh, it's a good thing to become a superpower, I think. When they're developing all these big things, and I'm glad, Minister, you mentioned the social licence to operate. Look, I'm a firm believer in solar power and the big developments. It's great. Go for it. But, just to steal a leaf out of Auntie's book over there in the Pilbara, when they talk about these big developments, we want jobs. We want the locals to be employed. We want the big developments to be offset, and we want them to be offset with Australian carbon credits, not the cheap stuff from overseas. We want them to provide jobs for traditional owners. We want to be able to supply Australian carbon credit units to these major developments so they are carbon neutral. We want to be able to support our local environmental, social and cultural values through these developments. Having the big vision is great. Doing the big development, I'm all for it. But if you don't have your social licence to operate, then you jeopardise the investment. And over in Western Australia, we've seen that the local people will arc up. I'll just say that the social licence to operate is very important.
Shamara, I wonder if you can give me an example of where government has built a climate finance regime that effectively attracts private capital, right? Because that's at the centre of what you're saying needs to happen. Where has that happened?
Well, look, one I'd suggest we look at is the UK offshore wind industry and how they've built things there. You know, they had the first round in 2015, and what they did, to the minister's point, is created certainty for the industry to come in and put capital in. So they had this contract for difference offtake price that gave you certainty if you spent years getting all the permits and approvals and brought on these offshore wind farms, that you would have offtake to help you put the capital there. And we've been involved now in 4 rounds of that, but what the UK has managed to do is get offshore wind to be more than 50% of its grid, sometimes 60%. And initially it had to set these prices to subsidise the projects, but now in the 4th round of bidding, the prices people are bidding have come down 70%. And
how much?
70%.
Wow.
Since the 2015 bidding rounds. And we've been involved in every round. We account for about 40% of the offshore wind in the UK. And the last round we bid in, well, now His Majesty, not Her Majesty, is making £100 million a year from the seabed leases bid for, and the Treasury is making another £100 million a year. So we've paid a lot for these seabed leases for the pleasure of being able to go out there and spend 6 or 7 years getting the permits, building these things, bringing the wind on, not seeing a cent of cash for 6 or 7 years because we trust this regime and have confidence in it. So it can catalyse a lot of private investment, and that has helped the UK as well play a big role in bringing down the technology cost and making wind not just viable and competitive in the UK offshore wind, but globally. The place we're moving to now is from fixed bottom to floating offshore wind. And again, the UK will lead on driving that technology by creating a regime to invest. So I think it's a good example of...
David, much is said about the scale of sun cable. It's huge, right? And I wonder if you can reflect, I heard you say in your speech that it's the beginning of many of these. That's what we need for that transition. So what policy settings do we need for that to happen?
There's some very practical matters that will help a lot. In any Western country, building linear infrastructure is really hard. Everyone has a view, everyone's got to be heard. It takes a long time to get social licence and everyone on board. So it really bugs me a lot to see a corridor, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be a road, a pipeline, a transmission line, being designed to do one thing. And then the other guy who needs a corridor of a similar nature to do some other thing has to start again. So when governments are planning corridors, it needs to be multi-purpose, because the future is going to need a scale of electricity generation that is truly unprecedented, and I don't think yet there's a good understanding in the broader community just how big the transition is going to be. And the scale of it means that you have to capture renewable energy resources where they are, which is a long way away from population centres. And you've got to transmit that energy in one form or another over long distance, and that means corridors. So a lot of thinking needs to go in at all tiers of government as to how to make those corridors work in the 2020s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Because without those corridors, you can't get the result through. The other element, there's numerous, but one more is that Shamara referred to, trust in the system and giving confidence. We need, and there was a reference also to the credibility of foreign credits and the like, and there is a lot of dodgy credits produced in international markets, which need to be stamped out. But we have globally, when the Australian government puts a stamp on something, it's trusted. And that would apply to offsets. That also applies to concept called guarantees of origin. So that concept has evolved with initially a focus on being able to say that a hydrogen molecule was generated using renewable electricity. So it's zero emissions. We are hoping, and I believe the government's intent is clear on this, that will be extended to electrons as well, so that when we transmit electrons internationally and it's received at the other end, comes with a piece of paper, digital paper, that says this was generated from zero emission sources, and the government says it so.
Minister Bowen, there is a debate which you clearly noted that right now is not the time to accelerate the move to renewables at the moment, and yet you've really lent in to renewables in your speech and more broadly in the comments I've heard you make. How much harder does this international energy crisis make that right now? And when we look at keeping energy affordable in the transition period, how are you going to do that?
How much harder does it make it? Well, I guess, Patricia, does it make it harder politically? I don't mean in a partisan way necessarily, but just in a political way.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe. Because, you know, it makes it easy for the people who are always looking, as I said up there, always looking for an excuse to delay. So, oh, look, renewables have done this, which is just a lie. But it gives them an argument. And you can sound sort of you can make yourself sound reasonable and say, oh, I'm not against renewable energy, but now's not the time, you know, which is just a nonsensical argument. If not now, when? The next 8 years are key to determining whether we hold the world to as close as possible to 1.5 degrees warming. I mean, we've already warmed 1.1. And 2050 is okay as an ultimate endpoint, but it's the next 8 to 10 years that really count, frankly. And we've left it too late to avoid the crisis. Our job is now to avoid the worst of the crisis. There is a climate crisis. Our job is to work towards avoiding the worst of it. And that only means action now. So there is no opportunity for delay. Quite the contrary. How do you keep energy prices low during the transition? I like to think of these things in sort of a short and medium-term track, Patricia, or perhaps a short-term track, which is how do you deal with the current spike in gas and coal prices? What do you do about that? Of course, you need to act under that because it will have a huge impact on Australian households and businesses if you don't. And frankly, you'll also lose community support for the transition, even if not related. You will lose support for the transition. So you've got to keep that in mind. But ultimately, you make sure the transition occurs more quickly, but in a more orderly fashion. I don't want to get down to the sort of nitty-gritty policy details about a capacity mechanism, but that's some of the things that obliquely we've been talking about. But all that is designed to put a safety net under the transition so it's more orderly, we don't have sudden exits without warning, without replacement, and we build the renewable energy ahead of the closures. As I said, we've had 4 gigawatts leave, 1 gigawatt come in. We've got to be building renewable energy in advance of closures. We can't say this is going to close and 2 years later we'll build the energy to replace it. We've got to be saying we're going to build this renewable energy now to replace a coal-fired power station which we know will close in 3 years' time.
It's interesting. Rowan.
Patricia.
Rowan. I know you believe there needs to be more leadership so that carbon credits are purchased domestically. You talked about junk credits. What do you think needs to happen on this kind of Buy Australian campaign?
Well, Minister, I'm glad you're here, Chris.
Here is your opportunity to lobby on a stage the Minister.
Okay, well, how long have we got? Well, look, you know, the first thing is that we can import the cheap stuff from overseas. We can't export the quality stuff overseas. An absolute trade debacle. So we can get the cheap carbon credits from China, India, Bangladesh. The high integrity carbon credits that we produce in Australia with environmental, social and cultural values, which the EU would absolutely love and we can sell for over $100 a tonne, we can't, the trade door is shut. So we need the trade doors opened up so we can trade internationally and, and link our international carbon markets with the rest of the world. So, that's certainly one aspect. I know there's the Chubb review at the moment, and, that's good. We all welcome a review. We look forward to that. Some people have some questions about the methodologies. The methodologies will be improved all the time. The one we got at the moment, look, it's good, it's not perfect, it will get better. So, I don't stress it too much. The Indo-Pacific, I think we have enormous opportunities in the Indo-Pacific. I know there's a program in place at the moment where we can be supporting the islands in the Vanuatu, Fiji, Papua New Guinea. We're working on East Timor. There's a lot of knowledge and experience Australia can export into our Pacific family that I think is, is a very, very positive program. And I think Penny Wong's doing a fantastic job. And I think that Australia's got a lot to offer the Indo-Pacific region. So, like the carbon markets, we've gone through our first crash. I don't know, we were going great. Then we had government intervention.
Not ours. Last guys.
Minister, whenever you get the urge to interfere with the market, don't.
No. Rarely. Sometimes you have to.
Funny you say that. David, I want to put a question to you from somebody here. Sebastian has asked, we want to become a superpower, and it refreshed just that moment, thank you. We want to become a superpower renewables generation, but what about the efforts to make batteries and PV in Australia? What plans do we have, especially batteries?
So when we talk batteries, it's kind of being used as shorthand. We really mean storage. So in our case, as I explained, for that first project, Australia-Asia Powerlink, we need about 41 gigawatt hours of storage, which is just an enormous amount. We know what technologies we're not going to use, and we've got a pretty good handle on what type of technology we will use, and it'll almost certainly be a mix of the batteries that everyone thinks of, lithium style batteries. But flow batteries will probably dominate. And we are taking a view on the progress of that technology over the next 6 years or so. But that's a pretty educated forecast of where that technology is going. So where will those batteries be manufactured? Flow battery technology is it's really amazing, but it's also quite simple. And someone referred to it, in fact, I shouldn't use that analogy because the battery manufacturers will get offended, but it is very simple. It's pumps and tanks. We can do all that. We do all that every day in Australia. So the opportunity to manufacture that technology here is absolutely on the table. And we are talking to battery manufacturers about that very point, and they're enthusiastic about that. Solar modules, there is, as the Minister said, I mean, it all started here. It started in Sydney. It started at the University of New South Wales. It's the home of the technology. It's still the leading centre of knowledge for photovoltaic technology, and yet we've only got a tiny manufacturing capacity. We have a view based on the data that we've collected of what a solar module should look like for our purpose. And we want to see that manufactured here. The entire process of manufacturing a solar module, if I can do it in very shorthand, is basically quartz rock, crush it, add electricity, melt it, smash it, which becomes silicon metal, smash it up, gasify it through a trichlorosilane plant. It reforms into extremely pure ingots of polysilicon, 99.9999999% pure. I missed one. And it's then shaved or sliced into wafers, 180 microns thick. You then paste silver on the back, place a whole bunch, and that becomes a cell. You place a whole bunch of those under glass, put an aluminium frame around it, and junction box on the back, you've made a solar module. All of those steps, we could start at the end and work our way back, and that's probably the more logical way to do it, I suspect, but others may differ in their view on that. It's absolutely within our capabilities to establish that manufacturing industry here. It only needs one project the size of the Australia-Asia Power Link to justify that supply chain investment, and now there are many multi-gigawatt scale projects in Australia. So there's absolutely demand for it, and we're trying very hard to get it manufacturers here.
Shamara, aside from what you talked about, offshore wind and electric vehicles, what other technologies or opportunities are there for Australia for this energy transition, as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, as David was discussing, there's a whole range of places we could play in energy. You know, to the Minister's point about renewables, solar and wind are now the cheapest new build energy sources. So it makes sense to do them if we need new energy. This issue we have is firming solutions. So yes, the battery projects we're involved in as well, important that Australia play there. Hydrogen, as we've discussed, is a source of firming and baseload renewable energy. We need to decide whether we want to play in bringing that to scale. The US has this Inflation Reduction Act that amusingly named Inflation Reduction, quite stimulatory act, but there's $360 billion allocated there for things like hydrogen. So they will be quite a leader in bringing it to scale. How do we want to work with them on that? That's in energy, but in transport, we talked about not just electric vehicles, but long-haul transport. Do we want to play a role in that? Rail, trucking, hydrogen potentially a solution there, but sustainable aviation fuels. In agriculture, Australia could play quite a lead role. So, you know, we've talked about things like precision farming technologies. We're working with CSIRO, as I said, on low emissions feedstock, methane reducing feedstock, carbon capture solutions there as well. So we were buying carbon credits in Asia for $10 and here Australia paying $20. I was really pleased to see that Australia's gone up to $57. We're buying a lot here because the quality of the credits is good, but a lot of private sector people are prepared to pay. You know, you were saying $50 is a break even for the fire credits. We could play a role in those sort of credits as well because soil carbon capture is another place we could lead on. So there's a range of things. It's really ultimately for us to decide what is the area we want to prioritise and, as we said, set the framework so that in the early stages when it's not economic for the private sector, we draw big volumes of capital and catalyse the industry, and then the industry runs with it. So we find at the moment the onshore wind farm projects we've done, we haven't needed to sell into the grid because the big corporates come and give us good offtake. So I think, you know, across the entire spectrum of energy, transport, agriculture, buildings, you know, green steel, fertilisers, shipping, the decision is for us, we have a lot of natural advantages. Where do we want to go? We shouldn't try to do everything at once, but it's glide paths that the country and the states can set, and then we'll come along with private capital.
Minister, I'm going to give you the last question of our panel discussion because we have a wonderful performance coming up. But I want to ask you, you told investors that the new Albanese government wants to unleash private investment in new clean energy projects when you were elected. You said this is a good investment opportunity. This was about really turbocharging this industry. What does that look like 5 months in? Are you seeing that investment as you imagined it?
Yes. I've been really happy and impressed with the response of investors both in Australia, by which I mean, you know, what I've seen in Australia by on and offshore investors, You know, I had the international chief executive of Iberdrola, a very large Spanish renewable energy firm in Australia a few weeks ago, talking about literally billions of dollars of investment. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But he said it's your act which has made us commit to that fund. We've been thinking about it for a long time, but we needed your act to pass so we know we have the certainty. But when I go overseas, I'm off to the COP in Egypt the week after next. You know, I spend a lot of time talking to renewable energy investors. As I said, offshore wind, I can't begin to tell you how much interest there is in Australia. We are the world's largest island, and we don't have any offshore wind, so there's a lot of catching up to do. You know, when you go overseas, you see it all around the world. So yes, I have been very pleased with the level of investment, but as I said, I'm pleased but not satisfied. There is so much more to do. I mean, I think we've all shown how passionate we are, but the size of this task is enormous. We have to put 60 more solar panels on roofs the next 8 years. We've got to put 40 wind turbines up a month to get to 43% emissions reduction. This is a very big task, and we just have to get on with it.
I want to thank the speakers tonight for giving us their insights, and really thank you too for coming to this discussion. Really, I think they've articulated well this case for reaching further and acting faster together in Australia to become this renewable energy superpower, which sounds amazing but appears possibly actually achievable. Now, it's not over, my friends. I want to thank, please start clapping, yes, my panel, the Minister, Chris Bowen, Shamara and David and Rowan. Thank all of them. Now that concludes our great City Talks for tonight. Thank you to all of our speakers and to the City of Sydney for presenting City Talks, which I really do think inspire, educate and engage people in these big, big issues of our times. Nothing as important as this issue. Now, most people don't realise, but the single best thing they can do for the environment, I think we grapple with this as individuals, is to simply switch to an accredited 100% green power electricity plan. It's quite easy to do, but you do need to check because the plans can be different, so you need to tick the box for 100% green power. Find out everything you need to know at getgreenpower.sydney this week if you haven't done it. I think the Lord Mayor mentioned it before. Thank you so much for your company tonight. I think it's been a really, really stimulating conversation. I'm Patricia Karvelis. It's been a pleasure to spend the night with you. We will all see you again in 2023. Good night.